The letter from my grandfather's attorney arrived on a Tuesday, 3 days after his funeral. Inside was a deed, a key, and a handwritten note. To my only grandchild, it read, "This land has been in our family for 4 generations. Take care of it as we have." I had always known about the property, of course, but had never understood its scope until that moment. 200 acres of pristine wilderness bordering Clear Lake, including an old family cabin, forests that stretched toward distant mountains, and natural springs that my ancestors had protected since the 1800s. I drove out there the following weekend. The narrow dirt road wound through pine forests until it opened to a view that stole my breath. Crystal blue water reflected snow-capped mountains. Wildflowers carpeted meadows in explosions of purple and yellow. Ancient trees stood like guardians along the shoreline. This was not just land. It was a paradise untouched by development, a rare treasure in our rapidly changing world. The cabin was small but solid, built by my great-grandfather with hand-hewn logs. Inside, everything remained as if my grandparents had just stepped out. Photographs on pine walls, handmade quilts on beds, old journals stacked neatly on bookshelves. I spent hours reading those journals, discovering how my grandfather had turned down offer after offer from developers. Some had promised millions, even tens of millions in later years. Each time his answer remained the same, not for sale at any price. One entry particularly caught my attention. The Henderson Development Group came again today, my grandfather had written, offered $20 million this time, told them the same thing I always do. This land stays in our family. Some things are worth more than money. I spent that first night on the porch watching deer graze by moonlight. My life in the city, my apartment, my marketing job, suddenly seemed hollow compared to this inheritance. By morning, I had made my decision. I would move into the cabin at least temporarily, work remotely, figure out exactly what to do with this extraordinary gift. For 3 peaceful weeks, I settled into a new routine, hiking the property boundaries, swimming in the Clear Lake, falling asleep to the sound of owls. That peace ended on a sunny afternoon when 3 black SUVs rolled up my driveway, crushing wildflowers beneath expensive tires. 5 people emerged, 3 men and 2 women, all in business casual clothing that looked oddly formal against the wilderness backdrop. Their leader, a tall man with silver hair and a smile that never reached his eyes, extended his hand. "Richard Harrington," he said, "President of the Lakeview Estates Homeowners Association. These are some of our board members. We wanted to welcome our new neighbor." I had not known there was an HOA nearby, but Richard quickly explained that Lakeview Estates bordered my property to the east, an exclusive gated community of luxury homes. "We have been curious about this parcel for years," one of the women said, her eyes scanning the landscape appraisingly. "Your grandfather was quite stubborn about development opportunities." "We would love to hear your plans," Richard added, his tone casual but his gaze intense. "This much land has tremendous potential." Though their words were friendly, something about their presence felt invasive. They asked pointed questions about my intentions, my finances, whether I planned to stay long-term. When I mentioned preserving the natural state of the property, I caught subtle glances exchanged between them. Their visit lasted 30 uncomfortable minutes. As they drove away, I felt uneasy. The next morning, walking the eastern boundary where my land met the HOA community, I discovered something disturbing. Bright orange survey stakes had been placed in a straight line 20 feet inside my property. Stakes I had not authorized. Stakes that had not been there the day before. The first letter arrived in an official-looking envelope with the Lakeview Estates HOA logo embossed in gold. Notice of ordinance violation. The heading declared in bold letters. The language that followed cited Section 8.3 of the Community Standards Agreement regarding appropriate maintenance of property borders adjacent to community spaces. It demanded that I clear underbrush along the eastern boundary and remove unsightly natural debris within 14 days. I had signed no such agreement. My property was not part of their HOA, yet the letter was worded as if I was subject to their rules. I called the number listed and reached Richard's assistant, who insisted all property owners in the area were bound by these regulations for community aesthetic standards. When I argued that my land was private and independent, she simply said someone would follow up with me. That weekend, I discovered a family picnicking beside my lake. When I approached, the father smiled casually. The community bulletin said the lake access was open to all Lakeview residents now. He showed me a newsletter on his phone with a map of community nature trails that cut directly through my property. By the following week, more residents appeared, jogging on newly cleared paths, letting dogs run off-leash, even setting up semi-permanent fishing spots. The most alarming discovery came after a night of unusual noise. I woke at dawn to investigate and found construction equipment, a bulldozer, backhoe, and several trucks parked just inside my property line. No workers were present, but the machines stood ready, as if positioned for immediate use. I photographed everything, noting the company name stenciled on each vehicle. Harrington Development Group. My attempts to document the encroachment became obsessive. I installed trail cameras along the borders. I took daily photographs of new violations, tree markings that appeared overnight, strange flags placed deep in my woods, Lakeview residents who became confrontational when I identified myself as the owner. My phone filled with evidence dated and geotagged. When I finally secured a meeting with Richard Harrington at his office in town, the connection became clear. Behind his desk hung a large framed photograph of him breaking ground on Lakeview Estates 10 years earlier. The company logo on his hard hat matched the one on the construction equipment on my land. His office walls displayed architectural awards for luxury developments across the state. "These are all just misunderstandings," Richard said, dismissing my concerns with a wave of his manicured hand. "Residents get confused about boundaries. Equipment operators sometimes park where they should not. I assure you we respect your property rights." His condescending tone made my blood boil. "Then remove the survey stakes and equipment immediately," I demanded, "and issue a correction to your residents about using my land." Of course," he nodded, not writing anything down. "Though I must say, a single person with 200 acres. It does seem rather selfish in these times. Our community could benefit tremendously from proper development of that space." I left his office with promises but no confidence they would be kept. My next stop was the county assessor's office to verify my property lines. The clerk typed my information into her computer, then frowned. "That is odd," she said. "There appears to be a pending boundary adjustment on this parcel." "Filed by whom?" I asked. "Lakeview Municipal Development Authority," she read. "Approved last month." When I tried to file complaints with local officials, I hit walls everywhere. The building commissioner was on extended leave. The county supervisor's office took my information but never called back. Even the police said property disputes were civil matters outside their jurisdiction. Every path led to dead ends or unreturned messages. The pattern was too consistent to be coincidence. Someone with significant influence was systematically blocking my attempts to protect my land, and they were moving pieces into place for something big. The morning mist still clung to the ground as I hiked through the densest part of my forest, an area I had not visited in several days. The sound reached me before the sight, Mechanical groans, shouts of men, the crack of falling trees. I quickened my pace, heart pounding, until the trees thinned and revealed a nightmare made real. Before me stretched a massive construction site where ancient pines had stood just days before. At least 3 acres had been completely cleared. Concrete foundations had already been poured in precise geometric patterns. Steel beams rose from some sections, forming the skeletons of large structures. Dump trucks and cement mixers moved in choreographed precision, while dozens of construction workers swarmed across what had been pristine forest. My legs nearly buckled. This was not minor encroachment. This was full-scale development, and it had happened with impossible speed. I approached a worker who appeared to be supervising, trying to keep my voice from shaking. "What is going on here? This is private property, my property." The man looked genuinely confused. "Sir, this is the Lakeview Resort expansion. We have all proper permits." He pulled folded papers from his pocket and showed me building permits, environmental clearances, and a property map. The map showed this entire section belonging to Lakeview Estates Community Development. "These are forgeries," I said, my voice rising. "I am the legal owner of this land. I have the deeds." More workers gathered around us now, looking uncertain. Their supervisor made a call, speaking quietly into his phone. Within 20 minutes, Richard Harrington arrived in a luxury SUV, stepping out in a tailored suit with a hard hat in hand. "There seems to be some confusion," he said smoothly. "Perhaps we could discuss this privately." "There is no confusion," I shouted, no longer caring about keeping calm. "You are building on my land without permission. This is illegal. Stop work immediately." Richard smiled tightly. "We have all necessary approvals. If you continue disrupting, I will have security escort you off the premises." "Off my premises," I countered, but Richard had already turned away, speaking reassuringly to the workers. Construction resumed as if I was invisible. I drove straight to the city, hands shaking on the steering wheel. That afternoon, I hired Samuel Keegan, an independent surveyor with no ties to local developers. He arrived the next morning with sophisticated GPS equipment. After hours of careful measurement and comparison with original property records, his conclusion was unequivocal. "This construction is definitely on your land," he stated, showing me his findings. "By my calculation, they have encroached approximately 18 acres into your property. The original boundary markers have been moved." I had the evidence I needed, but when we tried to present it to the county recorder's office, we were told the department supervisor was unavailable. His assistant, however, recognized me from my previous visits. When her boss stepped out for lunch, she whispered that I should meet her after work. Later, in a coffee shop across town, the clerk, Jenny, nervously slid a flash drive across the table. "I could lose my job for this," she said quietly. "But what they are doing is wrong. These are the development plans submitted 6 months ago. Look at the dates carefully." At home, the files revealed the full scope of what I was facing. Architectural renderings showed Lakeview Resort and Spa, a massive luxury complex with hotels, condominiums, golf courses, and retail spaces. The plans covered not just the area currently under construction, but my entire property, all 200 acres. Most disturbing were the dates. These plans had been created and approval processes initiated 3 months before my grandfather died. The next day, I visited the county record's office in the next town over and requested historical satellite images of my property boundaries. Comparing them with current official maps showed subtle but significant alterations that had occurred over the past year, all shifting the borders in favor of Lakeview Estates. A friend in the district attorney's office reluctantly shared what he knew when I showed him my evidence. Richard Harrington has connections everywhere, he admitted. His development company has built half the luxury properties in this region. The tax revenue is enormous. Nobody wants to cross him. There are rumors about planning commissioners getting free condos, judges receiving vacation packages. The conspiracy was breathtaking in its audacity and scale. They had systematically prepared to steal my inheritance through a combination of falsified documents, corrupted officials, and bold intimidation. The construction I had discovered was just phase one of their plan. If I did not stop them immediately, my entire legacy would disappear under concrete and luxury amenities. What hurt most was the realization that this had begun while my grandfather was still alive. They had waited for his death, knowing I might be easier to manipulate or intimidate than the stubborn old man who had repeatedly refused their millions. They had not counted on me inheriting his stubbornness, along with his land. The receptionist at Matthews and Brolin law firm did not make eye contact when she delivered the message. "I am sorry, but our partners have reviewed your case and cannot represent you at this time due to existing client commitments." It was the fourth law firm to decline my case that week. None would say it directly, but the implication was clear. Nobody wanted to challenge Richard Harrington or his development company. At Durham and Associates, a junior partner was more forthcoming after our official meeting ended. "Off the record," he said, checking that his office door was fully closed, "Harrington Development Group represents 30% of our firm's revenue. Even firms that do not work directly with them have connections through banks, investors, or board memberships. You are asking someone to commit career suicide." My desperation grew as construction continued unabated. The resort foundations expanded daily. My calls to regulatory agencies were met with bureaucratic runarounds. Local news ran glowing stories about the economic benefits the new resort would bring: thousands of jobs, increased tourism, tax revenue for schools and infrastructure. My break came through an unlikely source. My grandfather's old fishing buddy mentioned a lawyer who had once successfully blocked one of Harrington's developments on environmental grounds. "Warren Phillips," he said, "semi-retired now, cranky as hell, but fearless." I found Warren in a small office above a hardware store downtown. White-haired and perpetually scowling, he looked more like a disgruntled fisherman than a lawyer. His walls displayed not impressive degrees, but photographs of undeveloped land and newspaper clippings about development projects he had fought. "Harrington," he growled when I explained my situation, "that corrupt bastard has been paving over this county for 20 years. He reviewed my evidence, asking sharp questions and taking detailed notes. This is blatant theft with government collusion at multiple levels, not even trying to be subtle anymore." Warren agreed to represent me for a nominal fee. I was planning to spend my retirement annoying Trout, but this is much more satisfying. We filed emergency injunctions the next day, demanding immediate cessation of all construction on my property. For 2 glorious days, work stopped, but on the third morning, equipment roared back to life. Harrington's legal team had successfully argued that halting construction would cause irreparable financial harm, and posted a bond allowing work to continue during legal proceedings. When we filed complaints about the falsified documents, Harrington countersued, claiming I was maliciously interfering with legitimate business operations and demanding millions in damages. Each filing from our side was met with 3 from theirs, burying us in paperwork and procedural motions. The local newspaper ran a front-page story: "Inherited land dispute threatens economic development." The article portrayed me as an entitled outsider blocking progress that would benefit the entire region. Carefully selected quotes from local business owners lamented the potential loss of opportunity. My name appeared alongside phrases like obstructionist and anti-growth extremist. The public hearing at the county commission was the most blatant display of corruption yet. The meeting room filled an hour before the scheduled start, mostly with people wearing blue jobs and growth t-shirts. When Warren and I entered, conversations hushed briefly before resuming with pointed glares in our direction. The commission chairman, a longtime associate of Richard's, allowed each side 20 minutes to present. Warren delivered a precise, evidence-backed presentation showing the boundary falsifications, permit irregularities, and clear property rights violations. During his entire presentation, two commissioners checked their phones while another whispered to an assistant. Richard's presentation included architectural renderings of the completed resort, animated videos of happy families enjoying amenities, and charts showing projected economic benefits. 4,000 permanent jobs, he emphasized. 15 million in annual tax revenue. This is the future of our community. Public comments followed a similar pattern. Business owners, contractors, and HOA residents spoke glowingly about the development. When environmental concerns were raised by a few citizens, the chairman limited their speaking time. The commission voted 5-0 to deny our petition to halt construction. Outside the building, reporters thrust microphones toward me. "How does it feel to stand against the community's progress?" one asked. Before I could answer, Warren pulled me away. "Save your words," he advised grimly. "We expected this. Now we go to state court." That evening, Warren arrived at my cabin with disturbing news. I did some digging into Judge Harrison, who will hear our state case. He spread financial documents across my table. 3 separate LLCs connect him to Harrington's investment group. He will never rule against them. I stared at the papers in disbelief. Is there no one in this town not in Harrington's pocket? Warren's expression hardened. "Welcome to development politics in America. They have the money, the connections, and apparently the law, but we are not finished." I looked out the window at bulldozers still working under floodlights, destroying more of my forest even as night fell. The system designed to protect property rights had been thoroughly corrupted. If legal channels were blocked, I needed to find another way. Sleep became a luxury I could no longer afford. Each night, I sat surrounded by property documents, legal filings, and my grandfather's journals, searching for anything that might help me reclaim my land. It was in those exhausted early morning hours, rereading a geological survey from the 1970s, that I first noticed the references to unusual mineral compositions in the northeastern quadrant. The survey, commissioned by my grandfather, contained technical language about rare earth elements and mineral deposits that meant little to me at the time. But something about the specific minerals listed triggered a memory from my marketing work with a tech company. Those same elements were now essential components in advanced electronics and renewable energy technology. I began researching frantically. Calls to geology professors, online research about mineral values, discreet inquiries to technology manufacturing companies. The picture that emerged was staggering. The worthless rocks mentioned in my grandfather's journals potentially contained neodymium, dysprosium, and other elements now worth billions in the technology marketplace. Had my grandfather known? Some journal entries hinted he might have, references to turning down mining companies along with developers, his insistence that the land's value went beyond its surface beauty. Perhaps this explained his absolute refusal to sell at any price. He was protecting not just natural beauty, but an underground treasure. I commissioned a new, comprehensive geological survey, swearing the team to secrecy. Their results confirmed my suspicions and exceeded my wildest hopes. The deposits were extensive, concentrated, and relatively accessible compared to most such finds. In current markets, their value dwarfed even the projected profits from Harrington's resort. More importantly, the most valuable deposits lay directly beneath, where the resort foundations were now being poured. This changed everything. The half-built resort structures that had represented my defeat now became an unexpected asset in an entirely new strategy. Rather than fighting the construction, I began to see it as unintentional groundwork for a much more valuable development. I contacted Malcolm Jenkins, an old college friend who had become a successful venture capitalist. After signing non-disclosure agreements, I shared the geological findings. "This is extraordinary," Malcolm said, studying the reports. "Do you realize what you are sitting on? These minerals are the new oil, essential, limited, and increasingly valuable as technology advances." With Malcolm's guidance, I prepared a comprehensive presentation outlining a dual development opportunity: a luxury resort combined with sustainable mining operation, using new extraction technologies that would minimize environmental impact. The resort would become merely one component of a much larger, more profitable venture. Malcolm arranged discreet meetings with technology companies desperately seeking reliable sources of these minerals outside of politically unstable regions. In sleek boardrooms across the country, executives leaned forward in their chairs as I revealed what lay beneath my property. Initial offers started in the hundreds of millions and quickly escalated. "The current construction actually adds value," I explained in one meeting. "The infrastructure development already underway reduces the initial investment needed to access these deposits." The irony was delicious. Every cement foundation Harrington poured, every road his crews built, every power line they installed only made my property more immediately valuable for its true purpose. The very act of trying to steal my land had enhanced its worth. As negotiations with technology firms advanced, I simultaneously built a comprehensive legal file documenting every illegal action by Harrington and his associates: altered property records, falsified permits, bribed officials. My lawyer Warren, energized by our new strategy, gathered sworn statements from contractors who had been instructed to ignore boundary markers, and from county employees pressured to approve irregular permits. "This is no longer just a civil case," Warren explained. "We are building evidence for criminal charges, conspiracy, fraud, corruption of public officials. Even if they somehow beat the property claims, these could mean prison time." While Harrington believed he was still steamrolling an overwhelmed property owner, I was assembling the pieces of a devastating counterattack. The construction continued, but now I watched it with different eyes. Each bulldozer, each cement truck, each work crew represented not theft but leverage. Both physical infrastructure I could repurpose and legal violations I could use as negotiating tools. My grandfather had protected this land by refusing to sell. I would protect it by transforming the attempted theft into the greatest business opportunity of my life. The resort buildings would remain, but they would become just one element of something much larger, a development that honored both the land's natural beauty and its hidden wealth. 3 technology companies had now entered preliminary bidding in the billions. Before approaching Harrington, I needed one final piece: incontrovertible proof of his knowledge and direction of the illegal activities. Warren suggested deploying private investigators to monitor key players and intercept communications. "The mighty fall hardest when they believe themselves invincible," Warren said with a wolfish grin. "Right now, Harrington thinks he has won. Let him keep thinking that while we gather the final evidence." The Lakeview Estates HOA headquarters occupied a stately brick building overlooking the development's artificial lake. I had requested a meeting with Richard Harrington and his executive team to discuss settlement options. Their eager acceptance confirmed they believed I was finally admitting defeat. I arrived early, allowing Warren to set up our presentation materials while I observed the room. The large conference table gleamed under recessed lighting. Through floor-to-ceiling windows, I could see construction continuing on my property in the distance. A whiteboard displayed the resort construction timeline, with my cabin marked for demolition next month. Richard entered with 4 others: his chief legal counsel, the development company's CFO, the HOA vice president, and a man introduced as their primary investor. Their expressions mixed smugness with poorly concealed impatience. They had allotted 1 hour to formalize my surrender. "I appreciate your willingness to be reasonable," Richard began, not bothering with pleasantries. "We have prepared a generous compensation package." He slid a document across the table. $3 million for all remaining property rights, plus a luxury condominium in the completed resort. The insult of the offer, a fraction of the land's actual value, momentarily robbed me of speech. Warren squeezed my arm under the table, our prearranged signal to stick to our plan. "Before discussing figures," I said calmly, "I believe we should all understand exactly what property we are discussing and under what legal circumstances." I nodded to Warren, who connected his laptop to the room's projection system. The screen filled with the original, legitimate property survey contrasted with their falsified version. "This meeting is being recorded," I noted, pointing to the small device on the table. "So let me be clear about what we have documented." I clicked through slides showing the falsified permits, altered property records, and documentation of unauthorized construction. Richard's smile tightened. "These are administrative oversights that—" "Felony fraud," Warren interrupted. "Conspiracy, corruption of public officials." The mood in the room shifted palpably. The attorney began whispering urgently to Richard, while the investor glared at him with growing alarm. "We have signed statements from 3 county officials detailing bribes they received," I continued, "and from contractors instructed to ignore property boundaries. The district attorney has expressed significant interest in our evidence." Richard's face flushed with anger. "If you think threats will increase your settlement—" "I am not here for a settlement," I interrupted. "I am here with a business proposition." With perfect timing, Malcolm entered the room followed by representatives from 2 technology corporations. The confusion on Richard's face was priceless. "Allow me to introduce Malcolm Jenkins from Vertex Venture Capital, Dr. Elaine Chen from Quantum Materials Corporation, and James Wilson from NextGen Technologies." As Malcolm distributed presentation folders, I pulled up the geological survey results. What none of you realized when planning your resort is what lies beneath the surface of my property. For 30 minutes, we presented the mineral surveys, market valuations, and preliminary extraction plans. The estimated value of the rare earth deposits exceeded $50 billion at current market prices. The technology executives explained how these minerals were critical for everything from smartphones to electric vehicles to advanced military systems. "The construction you have already completed," Malcolm explained, "actually accelerates our development timeline by approximately 6 months, adding considerable value." Richard and his team sat in stunned silence. The CFO frantically scribbled calculations. The investor stared at the mineral distribution maps with naked greed. "Here is my offer," I said when the presentation concluded. "We form a new joint venture. Your resort continues as planned, occupying 20% of the property. The remaining 80% includes both conservation areas and mineral extraction using new technologies that minimize environmental impact." I detailed the financial structure. They would receive compensation for construction completed, plus 15% ownership in the new venture. I would maintain controlling interest. The technology companies would purchase 40% for immediate capital to complete both the resort and begin mineral operations. Alternatively, Warren added casually, we proceed with criminal charges against all parties involved in the land theft. Based on our evidence, convictions are likely. The property reverts entirely to my client, and we proceed with these corporate partners without you. The room erupted in tense discussion. Richard's team huddled at their end of the table, voices rising occasionally. The investor berated Richard for not conducting proper geological surveys before beginning construction. The CFO continued running numbers, his expression shifting from concern to cautious optimism. After 20 minutes of private consultation, Richard returned to his seat. The arrogance had vanished from his demeanor. "We need assurances regarding the criminal evidence," he said quietly. "Full cooperation and transparent partnership moving forward," I replied. "All evidence secured with our attorneys, to be destroyed only upon completion of binding agreements." More discussion followed: technical details, ownership percentages, management structure. By the time we concluded 3 hours later, the framework of an agreement had emerged that would transform not just my property, but the entire region. What had begun as theft would become one of the largest private development projects in state history. As the meeting ended, Richard approached me alone. "You could have destroyed us," he said, not quite meeting my eyes. "That was never my goal," I responded. "My grandfather believed in building things that last, that balance progress with preservation. He just would not compromise his principles. Neither will I." The morning of the groundbreaking ceremony dawned clear and cool. A massive white tent had been erected at the edge of the lake, with rows of chairs facing a podium backdropped by the mountains. Behind the seating area, displays showcased architectural renderings of the Legacy Resort and Technology Center, the official name of our joint venture. News crews set up equipment as guests arrived, local officials, corporate executives, environmental consultants, and community members. The mood was celebratory, electric with the energy that surrounds ventures of historic scale. I stood at the edge of the gathering, watching it all with a sense of surreal accomplishment. 1 year had passed since the confrontation in the HOA boardroom. 1 year of intense negotiations, redesigns, environmental impact studies, and regulatory approvals. The result was something none of us had originally envisioned, a development that balanced multiple competing interests in innovative ways. The resort portion remained, though significantly redesigned to integrate with natural surroundings rather than dominate them. The extraction operations would use new technology that allowed access to minerals with minimal surface disruption. Most importantly, over half the property would remain conservation land, permanently protected from development. The business press had followed the story closely. Our initial public offering had broken records, as investors recognized the unique combination of luxury tourism and strategic resource development. My controlling interest now represented personal wealth I could scarcely comprehend, billions on paper and growing. Richard approached as guests were being seated. His position as Chief Operating Officer of the Resort Division had been part of our agreement, acknowledging his development expertise while keeping him under supervision. "The governor just arrived," he informed me. "The investment commissioner from Japan is with her." I nodded, still not entirely comfortable with our working relationship. Richard had adapted to his new role with surprising flexibility, applying his considerable talents within ethical boundaries now that the incentives aligned properly. The ceremony began with traditional elements, speeches, recognitions, symbolic turning of soil with ceremonial shovels. When my turn came to address the gathering, I carried my grandfather's journal to the podium. "My grandfather wrote these words 50 years ago," I began, opening to a marked page. "Some will say I am foolish for turning down their millions. Perhaps I am, but I believe this land holds value beyond what any developer can see today. Future generations will understand what I protected." I looked out at the audience. He was right, though not entirely in the way he imagined. This project represents a new model of development, one that honors natural beauty, advances technological innovation, and creates prosperity that can be widely shared. After the ceremony, I walked the property boundary with Malcolm, now my chief strategic advisor. Construction teams were already mobilizing, engineering teams marking locations for both buildings and conservation boundaries. "The mineral yields are testing even higher than our initial surveys," he noted as we watched teams setting up specialized drilling equipment. "The first contracts with technology manufacturers are being finalized next week. This could eventually be worth over $100 billion. But my greatest satisfaction came from watching my grandfather's cabin being carefully reinforced and restored at the center of the newly established nature preserve. Educational facilities were being built nearby, where visitors would learn about both the natural ecosystem and responsible resource development. The Legacy Foundation, funded with 10% of our profits, had already begun acquiring other threatened properties throughout the region. Environmental scientists had been hired to develop new standards for balanced development that other projects could follow. That evening, I sat on my grandfather's porch watching sunset paint the mountains gold. Construction equipment stood silent in the distance, workers gone for the day. Across the lake, lights were coming on in the HOA community. The same people who had tried to steal my land now benefiting from increased property values and new amenities our project would bring. I opened my grandfather's journal again, reading by the last light of day. "Land is the only thing that lasts," he had written. "Take care of it, and it will take care of generations to come." The attempted theft of my inheritance had transformed into something my grandfather might never have imagined, but I believed he would approve. Not just preservation, not just development, but a thoughtful balance that respected both the land's beauty and its potential. His legacy protected, transformed, and multiplied beyond any expectation. Sometimes the best revenge is not destroying your enemies, but transforming them into partners in something greater than either of you could have built alone.